Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're back in War Thunder and it's time to have a look at another changelog, and this is pretty much just sorting out a few issues from yesterday. So if you didn't know yesterday, we actually got this new armor penetration calculations which were put in the game. Basically they worked around the idea of AP, APC-BC and rounds such as that, so anything containing AP, and then also a different formula for long rod APFSDS. So pretty much they changed the way that a lot of the calculations worked, and therefore because they did this, there is obviously going to be some rounds which just really hit the deck hard in a bad way, and therefore we have to try and work around them. Obviously every system isn't perfect. I'll go into my general thoughts of the system in a little bit, but let's go through the changes. So the first one is the Tiger II 105. The standard ammo has been changed. The 10.5cm Panzer Grenade replaced with a 10.5cm PZGR ROTS, and it was research built previously. So this is pretty much talking about how when these new changes came in, the Tiger II 105 has always had a pretty bad default round. It has never been fun to use. It's struggled to pen specific vehicles that it could face, and with the new changes, the rounds took an even bigger hit, and it actually went down to 175mm maximum penetration, which at 7.0, when you have such a long schlong, it doesn't feel good. So what they did is they just ditched the round and gave you the upgraded one, which has 249mm of pen at 0 and goes to around about 200 is probably the average you're going to be hitting at. So this is a great round. You know, it has been since it's come into the game, the Tiger II 105, which was, you know, I think it was in the initial release of Ground Forces, if not very close. But yeah, this upgraded round has always been the one to use. Everybody really enjoys it on the 105. So it's nice to see that it's default now, and you don't have to pay for it, and you don't have to grind through the horrible round. So that's a good change. Makes the 105 a lot more, nicer to use. The next one is the fuse sensitivity of APHE rounds has been corrected on the following guns: 37mm SA-18, 47mm SA-34. So these are French guns, rank 1 ones, and you can actually find the SA-18 on the vehicles which were taken out of the game. The APHE, actually, its fuse sensitivity was actually lower than the pen that it could have. So technically it couldn't set off its own fuse. So they've changed that now and fixed it. They've also changed one which is still in the tree, which is this 47mm SA-34. You'll find it on the AMC 34YR right here. You'll also find it, I think that might be it actually. Now with the changes, yeah, it looks like it might be, yeah, it's the last one which has this this gun, or maybe the only one that has this gun, and as you can see, its fuse sensitivity is now 6mm, and it only has 27mm worth of pen. So this machine here, if you didn't know, actually has less pen than the machines that were taken out of the game. Just to give you a little bit of a heads up if you want to start throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The next one is penetration value calculation has been corrected for the following rounds: the 125mm 3BM9 and the 100mm Obus de Rupture. So, the 3BM9 round is actually the stock round on the T64A, which you'll find here, and you can see it's right here, and also the T72A, which is right here. It isn't the stock round for the T80 or the T64, they actually get better stock rounds, so yeah, that's kind of nice to see that they fixed that. And then the 100mm Obus de Rupture is the vehicle, or mounted on the vehicles, that people have been a little bit scared of after these changes, and you can kind of see why. With a hell of a lot of pen past them, at least at 0 degrees, the 100mm Obus de Rupture on the Lorraine 40T, the AMX 50, and also the CA Lorraine, which I feel like people are just kind of sleeping on. The fact that this thing now at 6.0 has 300mm worth of pen, that should be a very, very fun to use. So yeah, that's another change. The 36mm BR167P bug with penetration data, so it has lower than the standard BR-167. This really only affected a few AA vehicles for the Soviets, so the vehicles which actually have both rounds, at least what I've found, are the ZSU-37, which you can find here. It has the BR-167 and the BR-167P. So one is the APT round, the other one is basically the HVAP round with the Heffy, and then the Type 65, which is has also the BR-167P and the BR-167. So the actual ZIS-43 has a 37mm and uses the BR-167, but it does not use the BR-167P. So yeah, it affects these two vehicles right now. If there are any more, I apologize for missing them. The 7.5cm KGR ROT PZ, the muzzle velocity has been reduced. This is by historical data, so remember when everybody tells you that Gaijin have thrown out the idea of historical data. No, it's just that they've decided to use historical calculations for the penetration. Everything else in the game is still by historical data, or at least as close as you can get it. The 75mm that we're talking about here is the short-barreled one from the Germans, and it's the stock round. So this one right here, the KGR ROT PZ, lowered in muzzle velocity, therefore lowered in pen. This is really not a fun stock round at all. When, it reminds me of the Italian stock rounds. Like if we actually have a look at stuff like these guys, the stock round here, 44mm of pen, wonderful. Oh, 51, watch out boys, God damn, yeah, those pens are awful. So yeah, they've actually changed the short-barreled 75 for the Germans. The 75mm Granata Perforante 7532 AP round speed has been increased from 623 to 637. So this is talking about the 7532 that I just looked at right here, and you can see that the Granata Perforante is actually now at 630 meters per second. Am I looking at the right one? It says 637 there, but at least on the stat card, it isn't. I might be looking at the wrong gun. Let's just make sure. Because, sometimes you do look at the wrong thing. So it's what? It's 75, Ansaldo 75 L34. Here we go, it's this gun, sorry. I was looking at the wrong one. So they've changed the Perforante, 637 meters per second, you can see it there. 77mm of penetration, still awful for a 4.0, but at least it's, it's slightly better than it was before. These, a lot of these guys got a slight buff for their AP shells. It ain't enough to change my opinions that I've made on them in previous videos. The last one is the 120mm M358 ballistics corrected, speed loss reduced from firing tables. So this is talking about the M103. The M103's stock round is the M358. You can see it right here. That is the round it is talking about. So let's get into thoughts and opinions of this new system, my general thoughts about it, and what I, think it is, see it for the future, or whatever you want to say from there. So I've seen a lot of discussions over the last few days about the new calculations, how they have issues, how they don't take into account certain modifiers of rounds, and all of these wonderful things. So let's try and break it down. The first argument that is made a lot is that we already have historical data for these rounds. Why don't we use them? And then for the rounds that don't have good historical data, why don't we use the formulas there? Well, if you use this idea, the first thing you've got to realize is, therefore, you're not putting everyone on an equal playing field. So you are going to inherently advantage others over other rounds because of their historical data. And if you're okay with doing that, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I think a standardized equal playing field that can be much easier understood by people is much better than something where we kind of pick and choose what we want to use. Because one of the main complaints that I've seen over the last years is the confusion on historical data. So one thing that has to be taken, or many things that have to be taken into account when looking at either publicly available information or wartime information, especially in World War II, one thing is you will find is the penetration of specific rounds from specific guns would actually be different. So let's say the Germans tested the 122 from the Soviets. They would probably get different penetration statistics to when the Soviets tested it, right? And the issue with this is it obviously creates a conflict. Who do you believe in this scenario? There's a famous case of basically Operation Barbarossa. When it comes to the Soviets actually fighting back, well, not fighting back, but actually being on the offensive, after Stalingrad. And once the Soviets were on the offensive, they obviously battered the Germans back all the way to Berlin. Now, the Germans have an estimate of how many troops they lost in the defense of, from the USSR to Germany. The Soviets have a number that they're estimated of units killed when it comes to German soldiers. And also the Soviets have an estimated number of how many they've lost, and the Germans have an estimated number of how many they killed. What you will find is if you look at all these statistics, none of them add up at all. They are not even close to each other. There are even claims that the Germans were trading about 1.9 to 2 to 1, in the defensive, against the Soviets, so when they were actually going from Stalingrad to Berlin. And then there are other sources saying that they were able to ratio 4.5 to 1, or 5 to, or around about 4.5 to 1. Now, this is a huge difference in the amount of men killed. But for some reason, we don't take that into account when we think about stuff as simple as penetration. People lie. Okay? Manufacturers lie constantly. We even had a few examples where we were looking at the vehicles... The vehicles passed to developers, where there was a bunch of vehicles that were passed on, and there was manufacturers' details basically saying what they believed would happen with these vehicles. And then when they were actually tested, they were found to be about 100 kilometers an hour slower than what the manufacturer had said. And this is an issue that has plagued me for a very long time, and I'm sure plagued a lot of other people, because it means that when you read what a manufacturer says, you can't take it as gospel. Just like it's very hard to also take pilots' opinions as gospel, which is why we need as much data as possible about a single point so we can make a general idea from it. But the problem with this is the fact that on top of the lies that you can also have propaganda, mainly because of World War II. You can also have different materials being tested, shot at, different ways of or different materials used to build the shell. You could even just have a shell one day which is slightly different to the next, and therefore the penetration tables would be completely off. So there's a lot of factors that have to go into it. And then on top of this, you also have the factor that some guns that we have in game now from some nations, mainly, the ones which struggled a little bit in World War II, we'll say, do not have the same amount of data behind them as other nations. So you could create a two-tier system here. You could create a system where you have very accurate penetrations for one side, and then you would have literally nothing for the other side. Or you could create a system that tries to standardize everything and try to keep everything together in a way that you can balance the game around. And therefore, if you put everything on an equal playing field when it comes to this idea, there can be no cause for bias. And the next argument is that, well, there's things that these calculations don't take into account, like hardness of shells. So basically hardness of materials used. Now, this runs into the same issue. First of all, not every shell is manufactured the same. Second of all, when it comes to the hardness of shells, all we have is certain, obviously, historical data talking about how the shells were created, what was used for them, so we can go off that, but we don't have that for every shell in the game. So we either have to create an estimate or an average, or we have to favour others over the rest. And once again, if you do that, you sit in a situation where people will constantly claim that you are being biased. We actually had this a few years ago. What is kind of funny to me is that now people are asking for modifiers on shells, such as hardness modifiers or material modifiers, to make them more quote-unquote realistic. A few years ago, we used to have armor modifiers, which would actually take into account the quality of steel that certain tanks were made out of. And specific nations, I believe Germany at the time, didn't have a good time of it because they had some negative modifiers on them. And I believe the Soviets had a few positive ones. And all this did was create a big aggressive mound of people who just decided that it was time to annihilate Gaijin because of these armor modifiers. But today, people are arguing to bring those ideas back. Which is it? Is it bad? Is it good? Should it be okay for this and not okay for that? Should we have double standards? Or should we try and keep everything, once again, on a level playing field? I'm very, very happy with having the idea of a level playing field being put out there. And that's what I see this system does. It puts everything on an equal playing field. And yes, I understand that people are pointing out, oh, look at the pen on the Lorraine, the IS-7, the SA-50. All of these machines could easily pen anything they could face anyway. What I see from these calculations so far is that certain rounds, not looking at top tier, but looking at the rest, certain rounds are going slightly up and slightly down. There are no massive changes with these rounds when it actually comes to what they can penetrate. And there's a lot of people who are pointing at statistics which are kind of false. Like, here, I'll show you. So, let's go to the IS-7, the big beluga. So the IS-7 has always been a very powerful tank. It's always been very good because of its autoloader and its gun, and the fact that it could just kind of one-shot anything once it pens. A lot of people are looking at this round, and they're looking at the 0-degree pen. So 311 millimeters at 10 meters, and people are running with this number. It reminds me of, even with today, where here's some topical stuff. So Activision Blizzard just cut a bunch of their employees, even though they had the most quote-unquote profitable year ever. But the thing is, Blizzard, in their financial reports, because they're a public company, they actually have to show, what finances they actually have. And they have produced numbers and shown numbers to the public of of revenue before it's taxed, before it's when you take out all of the actual expenses that they have and everything like that. So they've given you a raw number of what they made last year. So last year, they made the most money they ever have in their history. The problem with this is, they don't give us the whole picture. They just give us a little bit of a smidget, and then the rest of it, such as the expenses, the taxes, other additional costs that there may be, and instead of giving us the whole picture, they give us just a little bit, and we're supposed to just eat that up and not worry about anything else. That's the same with people trying to sell you the idea that the IS-7, because it pens 311 millimeters, is an amazing, crazy, good round. It was always really good. There's no change here. It's just slightly better than it was before. Do people not realize how good it was before? It was amazing before. It's still amazing now. Just like the Lorraine. Just like the SA-50. I've said the SA-50 could easily be a 5.7 tank. The main ones for me that actually have changed, when we actually look at, positive changes, it's stuff like the M26. So the M26, there's now a reason to use the M82 round. It actually pens more, at least at 0 degrees. So I can go through, I still can't go through Tiger 2s, but I at least have a little bit more pen. And once again, a lot of them are very similar to the M26, where they have a slightly different pen now. Not too different. It's not game-breaking. It's not going to make a huge difference. And yes, we're going to get a lot of changes like this, where they're slowly going to work out what they need to take out, what they need to move around, what ballistics they need to change due to historical documents. Because look, they're still using historical documents for the values they're putting into the equations. So all this nonsense about we're throwing historical values out the window, that's not the case. The thing that's getting thrown out is the penetration tables. Because the penetration tables are not standard across the board. It's as simple as that. And if they're not standard across the board, it means that ad infinitum, people can claim bias. People can claim that stuff is wrong. And it also is a pig's ear to try and actually balance stuff. Because no matter what you do, there may be another source which says something different. Do you go with that source? Do you go with this source? Instead now, once this tank comes to game, you plug in the historical numbers into the formulae, and what you create is the tank. And that's it. It can't be changed. Unless those base numbers change. Which they might do, if there's another source. But now we're just back to square one, right? So at the end of the day, not really a lot has changed. But for some reason, I talked about this before. I've talked about this last year. I talked about it the year before. I'll even show you the video where I talked about it. And because this was actually at the end of the video. Oh, sorry, not end of the video, but it was at the end of the the shitstorm. So with here, so 9 months ago, there was a Reddit thread, and I'll show you the Reddit thread. Let's just make sure that's paused. And this was at the end of 3 months of solid, screw gauging, basically. It was talking about the loot boxes, power creep most tanks into oblivion, continue to develop shitty game mode instead of actually fixing it, still not had open beta for boats, well that's changed, still not even cared about the increase in community outreach program, with Stoner, does nothing about queue times, there's so many things here which are just like, alright, you're bitching. It's as simple as that. And I went through it in these videos, in these 2 videos, and basically what I found. Hey Kit, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone.
Thank you, dear. Thank you very much. But basically, with the community, for some reason, in February to March to May, but generally January, February is when it is, there's just, for some reason, everybody just claims the sky is falling, The sky is just disappearing and everything in the game is going to die. You can literally go read it on the comments. There was 60,000 people online in War Thunder today. There's 24,000 on now because it's American time. But European time, there's 60,000. That hasn't really changed in about a year. You could say, oh, it's not really growing that much. Okay. I agree with you. That's literally what I've said from 3 years ago. It's very much a stagnation of a player base which increases and decreases with updates going along. But the main thing is, for some reason, January and February is just the time where people just decide that it is time to go after Gaijin. And I don't know why. It's a weird phenomenon, and I wonder if it happens in other games at certain time periods. And I just think it's because there's not a lot of stuff going on. That's the only thing I can think of. It's kind of a dull period. They introduced a bunch of stuff around Christmas. Nobody is even discussing supersonic stuff. I haven't seen anyone discussing it. People have stopped discussing helicopters. They're not talking about top tier, nothing. They're just bitching, to be quite honest, about a lot of things. The main thing right now being the armor penetration. And what happens is this creates an incredibly bad negative feedback loop. If Gaijin, right, see the community screeching over changes, which are not very large changes in the grand scheme of things, especially when you compare them to the game right now, and they even open opportunities and open doors up for the future for rounds which we would have never seen in the game before because they didn't have a lot of data on them, and maybe even guns that we don't have data on but we knew existed in a realistic sense. It opens all these doors up. It makes everything easier to put into the game. But no. Because you don't understand how the equations work. Because you don't understand what a standardization is. Because you don't understand how putting everybody on a level playing field is a good idea, especially when it comes to a competitive game. You are now creating a scenario where Gaijin won't want to talk. There was something also that I've discussed quite a lot. So if I'm in a boardroom, or let's just say if I'm in a meeting, right? If I'm in a meeting, there's a guy sat to my left, there's a guy sat to my right, there's a lady, sat opposite, there's a lady sat over there, and we're just chatting, working out what to do for next quarter. If somebody comes in, screams in our faces, which is literally what is being projected now, a person who buys our products, let's say we sell lamps, he has a lamp in hand, smashes the door open, screams in our faces that the bulb is not working properly, and the wires are a little bit loose. You know what we're going to do? You either shut the door in the guy's face, because you don't want to be screamed at, or you throw him out the window. Because nobody wants a customer that is incredibly aggressive and negative towards you. Because what happens is, first of all, it has a negative impact on you, and second of all, it is a poison. It turns into, if they are hyper-negative, you'll find that a lot of people like talking about negative things, right? They like discussing negative things. They like discussing negative things about people. That seems to be the main thing that a lot of people like to do. So they discuss the massively negative things about people. And what they do is they just spread. Because it's much easier. It's much easier to take piss out of something instead of fixing it. It's much easier to scream, throw your toys out the pram, smash your head against the door. Instead of just sitting down and going, right, how the hell do we fix this? Can we fix this? Does it need to be fixed? These questions don't go through people's minds, because that's not easy. What's easy is to just smash around the place and annihilate everything. And hopefully this mentality changes. It seems to change a lot with age, I will say that. I find a lot of people that I interact with who are older, there is a lot more deep breath, okay, let's have a look at this. But people who are around, the 16 to 18 to 20, it just seems so easy to set up like a fire mob under people, set up like a witch hunt. I even saw it the other day on a War Thunder Reddit post. There was literally a pinned post made by a moderator which said, "This is a riot I can get behind." It says in your rules that you're not supposed to witch hunt, you knob. Come on. The last thing I will point out, which isn't to do with the armor penetration stuff, it's actually to do with taking the vehicles out of the game. Now, I actually disagree with taking out the vehicles. I pretty much disagree with all the vehicles being taken out, but especially the French ones and the Hangar. So these are the first, ground vehicles that have been taken out of tech trees. The Hangar is one of the most produced Japanese vehicles, maybe even the most produced Japanese vehicles of all time when it comes to tanks. It is iconic for Japan. It's very similar, the way I see it at least. Imagine if you took away the Sherman from the Americans, right? That is how much cultural significance, historical significance, the Hangar has when it comes to the Japanese. So taking this out of the game, I think, is a bad move. Even though it isn't very good. Even though it's kind of useless. You know, it's pen, 31mm, not great. Just don't make it a reserve. You swap the reserve. As you've already done. You've made the Key a reserve. Just make the Hangar a folded vehicle with the Igo. That solves the issue for new players. They don't have to play it. And it's still in the game. This is an incredibly important vehicle historically. Even if you don't want to think it is, it is. Go and have a look at the history of the Hangar. It's really interesting. You know, it's something to look up and really go through. Now the French, the H-35 and the FCM-36. What is funny about these two is a lot of people have been pointing out that they don't pen a lot. Well, they never did in the first place, which was why they were awful. It's why everybody talks about how rank 1 ground for France is one of the worst grinds in the whole tree, or in the whole game. And it's true. It's absolutely abysmal. But the H-35 and the FCM, they've got 36mm of pen, maximum. You know, they're normally rocking around maybe 30mm, maybe around that is probably better. Yeah, the APHE round is awful, but you never used it. It was always awful. You used the APCR. I want to show you a tank that has worse pen than it. And it's still in the game. Oh, sorry, it's still in the tech tree. Why is the AMC 34YR? Why is this in the game then? If the issue is penetration, if the issue is your gun not doing anything, this one's worse than the FCM and the H-35. It has less penetration, and it would probably do less damage too. So what is it? Why were these taken out? It obviously because did they just forget about this thing? Maybe. I don't know. But they have said that they are looking into replacements for these vehicles. So I am happy that they're doing that. You know, I'm happy that they are looking to maybe bring in some new vehicles to replace them. But the question is, what's the consistency here? If you've taken these out because their armor isn't very good, or because their engine's awful, or because their gun's awful, the AMC-34 is worse in every way. The only thing it's not as bad at is engine power. Everything else is worse. So why? Why is this little chunky thing in the game still? The only thing I can think of is they're thinking of adding in rank 1 scouts, right? So then it would actually have a use in the game. Just like how they've just put the M22 at rank 1. But logically, it doesn't make sense. This thing has less pen than the Hangar. Just think about that. So I don't know what's going on. I'm very confused, to be quite honest, when it comes to these vehicles taken out. So I do agree that the penetration changes and the equations used is a good move. I do, because of the fact of standardization. I generally think that's a good idea, makes it simpler, means that if there are issues in the game, we can much easier point them out instead of arguing over sources. When it comes to the vehicles being taken out, I'm not okay with that. I disagree with those decisions. I would have kept them in, and if you don't think they're valued vehicles, folder them. Hide them away, but don't take them away from new players. I don't like the fact that we have so many vehicles now that if I started the game tomorrow, I would never see. You know? I did a video today on the Lag 3-4. It's a cool vehicle. I had never seen it in-game until I asked to get a test drive on it. It's as simple as that. And it's because it's so rare. And maybe that's nice for the people who own it. But the people who don't, they don't even know it exists. And then, you know, other stuff. I mean, they've been doing great for gift vehicles, you know, bringing them back. You know, I thought the transfer thing they did in the good old summer event, where you could transfer your lower tier vehicle, the SDKFC 2343 for another vehicle. I thought that was nice. I hope they bring that back again. I like the workshop stuff. I thought the i7 event was pretty fun. You know, I like the fact that they're bringing back old bundles and stuff like that, and I'm sure they'll do that in the future as well. But I just don't like that they've taken out so many vehicles out of these trees. And look at all these. Like the German-Italian planes. People will never see them. They just won't exist for people. You know, this one. This was actually taken out way before the other ones. The Sparvieros. It's just... And it's even got a camo. It's got 3 camos. What the hell? But yeah, it's just... Oh, look at that. It's just kind of sad to think that a new player will not get the same experience I did. Because they won't be able to get all these vehicles. And there'll be just plenty of people who will just, you know, ask constantly, where is this vehicle? Why can't I get it? Where can I get it? And the answer will be, I'm sorry, you can't. And that's just not good to me. I would rather there be an option for people to buy them. Buy them or grind them through achievements or something. Just something to make them available for people. Even if it is just for the rank 1 stuff. Even if it is just for Pyramid Head, right? Justice for Pyramid Head. You could bring it back. You could say, hey, get 1,000 kills with French tanks, you get Pyramid Head. A lot of people wouldn't strive to get the 1,000 kills to get Pyramid Head. But when they get it, it will be a nice surprise. And it would mean it would still be available for everyone to get. Instead of it just being locked away in a hole for people to brag about. Anyway. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And I'll see you next time.